Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's video is answering a question that I frequently get in my comments, which is how did I learn to speak Korean, French, and Japanese, and English. If you're new here, I make videos in all of those languages, and today I will be talking a little bit about my language learning journey. If you have your own experience learning languages, I would love to hear about it in the comments, whether it's one of these languages, whether it's a different language. I'd love to hear about your experiences. But if that sounds interesting to you, let's get straight to it. So this may seem obvious to some of you, but I do get questions asking where I'm from or what my native language is. My native language is English. And I learned English by being born to English-speaking parents and being raised in the United States, which is where I'm from. So I am a native English speaker. I was raised monolingually. My parents do not speak any other languages. And I did not start learning my second language until I was 14 years old. But I'll start talking about that in just a minute. But yeah, I am from the United States, and I am a native English speaker. The first language I started to learn after English was French. My high school offered 2 foreign language options, French or Spanish, and I chose to enroll in French. My original plan was to double up on French courses, finish them my sophomore year, and then start Spanish, so that I could do both languages. But I ended up just investing fully into French. The way my high school worked is that you took 4 classes a semester that were an hour and a half long, and you changed classes each semester. So that way I was able to take French 1 in the fall, French 2 in the spring, French 3 the next fall, and French 4 the next spring, and finish all of the basic French courses by the end of my second year of high school. Then me and several other students got the French teacher to end up offering a advanced French 5 course just for the maybe 6 or 7 of us who were interested. And then I did an independent study in French, and then I TA'd for the lower level French classes. When I was a junior in high school, so after my 3rd year of high school, my French teacher led a 2-week-long trip to France. So we spent 1 week touring France, mostly Paris, and then a week in the south of France staying with a host family. So during that week I lived with a French host family, spoke to them only in French. So even though that was a very short period of time. It was a quick, immersive experience where I got to test my French in the real world. After high school, I went on to minor in French in university. My major was linguistics, and actually I did not quite minor in French. I was one class away from getting the French minor, but I had a course conflict or a schedule conflict my final semester and was unable to take that course. So I got very, very close to getting a French minor, but technically I didn't finish it. Since graduating from undergrad, I really don't use French that much outside of scripting and creating French language videos for this channel. I don't consume a lot of French language media. I listen to some French music, but not a ton. And out of the languages I speak, it's definitely the one that I use the least. However, because French is fairly similar to English, especially when you compare it to Korean or Japanese, I feel like my French has not diminished too much, even for lack of use. But I do make an effort to make videos in French and try to do new role plays or new scenarios that I might not have explored previously. But my French learning journey is fairly straightforward. I started in high school, continued in college, and now I use it a little bit, but not that much. Compared to my French learning experience, my Korean learning experience is a very long and winding road. I started learning Korean, Korean, a long time ago when I started learning Korean kind of by accident, or not by accident, but by coincidence. So I grew up in a pretty small town in the middle of the United States, and a local university had a partnership with a Korean university. And those universities decided that they wanted to extend that partnership to a local high school, which ended up being my high school. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I found out about the opportunity to study abroad for a summer in South Korea. At the time, I didn't really know anything at all about Korea. I didn't speak Korean. It was just not on my radar, but I knew that I was very interested in travel, in learning languages, and in going new places. So I signed up. I jumped at the opportunity. In preparation, I spent about 6 months learning Korean via Rosetta Stone, which, looking back, is not the best language resource, but I didn't have access to in-person classes. I didn't really have access to any sort of Korean-speaking community, and I knew that I wanted to go with at least a little bit of knowledge of Korean. So I spent 6 months learning Korean via Rosetta Stone and then went to South Korea for 6 weeks. Through online learning, my Korean did not get very good. I knew like some adjectives, some colors, things like that. But I communicated with my host family mostly through a mix of English, Korean, and pantomime. But I had the absolute best time. To call that experience life-changing is almost an understatement, because it really did set off my life in a new trajectory. I formed an incredible bond with my host family. I've been back to visit them several times now that my Korean is much better. But I got this serendipitous opportunity to go to Korea, and when I came back, I decided that I wanted to keep learning Korean. I was still enrolled in my normal French classes, but I got a Korean tutor online and did one-on-one Korean lessons for maybe a year, maybe a little less than a year, until essentially my parents decided that they didn't want to keep paying for them because I was 16 or 17 at the time. Around this time, I found out about a program called the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, or NSLY, which is a State Department funded scholarship for American high school students to study languages abroad. And they have a summer program and an academic year program. I applied to go abroad for an academic year for Korean, and I was not accepted. And I was devastated. I just remember crying about it, being so upset. But I reapplied in order to take a gap year, because they accept students as long as you are under 18 by the time the program starts. And my second time applying, I was admitted. So for this program, I spent a gap year, 9 months, living in Seoul, South Korea. I lived with a host family. I attended a Korean language high school, and I spent 12 hours a week outside of just typical school days, enrolled in intensive Korean classes. This was obviously hugely beneficial for my Korean skills, and honestly, I don't know if my Korean has ever been as good as it was after the end of that year. Because I had just spent an entire year living in Korea and using Korean every single day. After that year abroad, I began university back in the United States, where I decided to also minor in Korean. So I took the language placement test at my university and placed out of all of the typical classes that they offered, because I had just gotten back from a year of super intensive language study. So I was given special permission to take the Korean for Heritage Speakers class, which was a class that is offered to students who grew up in Korean-speaking families but may not be fully fluent. And so I enrolled in that class, even though I was not raised in a Korean-speaking family, and took that class for 2 semesters, but that was as high as I could get in the university. I took other Korean literature classes, Korean history classes, but those were all of the language classes that were available to me. And so I didn't have that many other opportunities to keep using Korean. However, I then applied for the Critical Language Scholarship Program, which is like NSLY. So it's a State Department scholarship for intensive language study, but is offered for university students. So I applied to CLS for Korean and was accepted and spent 8 weeks in Gwangju, South Korea, taking 5 hours a day of Korean classes. During the CLS program, you actually have to sign a language pledge that says that you will not use English throughout the duration of the program. So it's highly immersive. All of the class instruction is in Korean. You are contractually obligated to speak with your host family only in Korean and with other participants only in Korean. So I did that program. I spent 8 weeks abroad in South Korea again for the 3rd time, and then came back to the States where I proceeded to not self-study any more Korean. What happened next? I came back, was my junior year. I didn't do much Korean study that year, but then I spent my fall semester of my senior year of college abroad back in South Korea. I had debated heavily going to Japan, but Korea can't keep me away. So I spent a semester studying abroad at Kookmin University in Seoul. And while that semester was really fun, it wasn't quite as beneficial for my language development. I was living in an international dorm, so among my dorm mates, the common language was English. We didn't really speak Korean with each other. I was taking classes in Korean. The language of instruction was in Korean, but most of my socializing was happening in English. After I graduated undergrad, I went on to do a master's in East Asian languages at the University of Oxford, where my language of concentration was Korean, if you could guess. So while I did not take Korean language classes, I did take classes in translation theory, in Korean literature, in Korean everything, and I ended up writing my thesis about Korean cinema. Since I have graduated with my master's degree, I've continued to use Korean in a professional environment. I've worked in Korean translation. I've worked as a Korean specialist at other jobs. And I tend to use Korean not necessarily every day at work, but if something needs to happen in Korean, I'm the person they call. So I do continue to use Korean in a professional environment. And just 6 months ago, I went back to Korea to do Yonsei University's 3-week language course. So I spent 3 weeks back in Korea, enrolled in language classes, speaking Korean, making friends in Korean, because I just felt like although I was using Korean somewhat regularly, it was getting pretty rusty. I hadn't been back in 6 years and wanted another chance to go and refresh my language skills. So Korean, besides English, is definitely my strongest language. I feel most comfortable conversing in Korean compared to French or Japanese, but that's because it's the language I've been studying most intensely and for the longest time. I technically started French first, but I've been more consistent with Korean, definitely. Although there have been periods of time where I really don't study Korean. I'm not very good at self-studying. I really thrive in a classroom environment, but when it comes to self-study, I'm not too great at it, which will be a common thread for all of these languages. The last language that I am proficient in is Japanese. And I started taking Japanese classes when I was a sophomore or junior in college. As a linguistics major, I was required to take a foreign language, and although I was already taking French and Korean courses, I decided that my foreign language for linguistics would be Japanese, because I had always wanted to learn Japanese. I grew up watching a lot of anime, reading manga. I was much more involved in Japanese pop culture than I was in French pop culture, and I had just always wanted to learn Japanese. So I began with elementary Japanese. I began knowing absolutely nothing. I had to learn hiragana, I had to learn katakana, and some kanji. My kanji reading skills are not great. But I just progressed normally through the Japanese language courses. I ended up taking some Japanese film courses just for fun, and I realized that I was actually only one course away from getting the Japanese language minor. I needed one more class to complete my Japanese minor, and you'll never guess what class it conflicted with. It was at the exact same time as the final class I needed to complete my French minor. So I decided that I would do the Japanese course instead. It sounded more interesting to me, and I ended up dropping my French minor and getting a Japanese minor instead. When I finished undergrad, I went on to my master's degree, and although Korean was my language of concentration, you are required to take 2 Asian languages in order to pursue the master's in Asian studies, and so I chose to continue with Japanese. So I placed into, I think, upper intermediate Japanese and took Japanese language classes. I took an intensive kanji course, and I did Japanese in grad school. And since I have finished grad school, I have not really needed to use my Japanese again. I've been to Japan twice for vacations, once with my family when I was younger and did not speak any Japanese, and once during college after my study abroad to Korea, where I did speak some Japanese, and I feel comfortable using Japanese to order food, navigate the subway, basic tourist things. But my Japanese is definitely the weakest of my 3 languages. I have, however, enrolled in an online Japanese course that will start in about 3 weeks from now, and it is a 15-week Japanese course. I've tested once again into upper intermediate, so my Japanese hasn't really gotten any better, but it also hasn't gotten too much worse, which is good because I very rarely use it, except to script and write and make videos for this channel, which was some of the purpose for this channel. I love making ASMR, and I like using it as an opportunity to continue to use these languages I worked so hard to build proficiency in. This is where I will caveat pretty heavily. I am comfortable speaking French, Korean, and Japanese, but the videos for this channel are pretty heavily scripted. If you saw me in a natural conversation in these languages, it might look a little different. The vocabulary that I know, the grammar I use might vary, and I probably look a little bit better than I am because I spend a lot of time writing the script for these videos in advance, where I can spend more time checking for errors that might come out if I was just improving them. I am very confident in my Korean skills particularly, and this isn't to say that I am faking it, but I do put a lot of work into making non-English language videos, and I hope that comes across. But it isn't necessarily effortless for me. I still have to think a lot in order to speak, particularly in Japanese. But I'm excited to keep learning and take this next class and hopefully continue to improve, or at the very least maintain, my language skills. Learning languages is something that I have always loved. Ever since I was young, I was very interested in foreign cultures, other languages, and I'd always wanted to be proficient in a bunch of languages. I'd actually love to speak more. I have some experience learning German and some learning Portuguese and also American Sign Language, but none of those are at the level where I would feel comfortable putting them online. Maybe if I get a little bit better at German, I might make a German language video someday, but that is at the back of my mind right now. But yeah, I hope you found this video interesting. If you have a similar experience, I'd love to hear about it. If you are an American high schooler, I highly recommend applying for the Nisli Y program. It's a super great program, and it is huge for language learning. I'm super lucky that I've had the opportunities that I've had for language learning, particularly when it comes to receiving scholarships that have benefited my language learning journey. And I definitely don't take it for granted. I know how lucky I am in order to be accepted to these programs. And hopefully I do them proud by continuing to use my language skills on a regular basis. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. But for now, good night. Good night. 안녕히 주무세요. Bonne nuit. 오야스미 나사이.